one of the things that I really suggest in the 21st century is beginning with a sleep tracker. The reason I say that is just because I've spoken to so many people that are very adamant that they sleep great, no problem, and then they get some sort of sleep tracker, and it can actually become, a new challenge for them to take on, because then they start to see, oh wow, wait, what? My heart rate is high throughout the entire night, and maybe it's just finding its lowest point right before I'm waking up, which tends to relate to being just really dragging and tired. Or my body temperature is high throughout the whole night. Oh my goodness, is that relating to the, nightly cocktail that I'll have or what have you? Starting to get connected to all of those things that we're doing and the results that we're having. So I think that can be a great place to begin, because then that can start to show you in black and white the reality of those things. Because there are a number of things around sleep that are gray areas. We might not actually remember the many wake ups we might have had. And once you start seeing that in black and white again and again, then it can motivate us to make the difference.
Welcome, everybody. Today I have Molly McLaughlin. She is the creator of Sleep is a Skill, and she's going to talk with us about why sleep is the skill to prioritize now and going forward. And one of the things that really engaged me in her work is listen to her podcast, first her story about how she got engaged in this work, and then listen to the first episode of that after that, and realize that there's a lot I don't know about sleep. And I pride myself on being pretty well informed, but there's still some things I could improve on. And I figured as entrepreneurs, just as people, we could definitely use more of this. And so first, welcome to the podcast, Molly. Thanks for coming out.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for listening to the podcast. I hope you got hopefully some sleep gems out of that.
Absolutely. And I've got some sleep homework. So real quick, I'm going to read to you a little bit about Molly's background. She's the creator of Sleep is a Skill, a company that optimizes how people sleep through a unique blend of technology, accountability, and behavioral change. The company was born from scratching her own itch after a lifetime of poor sleep habits culminated into a mega challenging bout of insomnia for months without end. With a background in psychology and human behavior, she went down the rabbit hole to solve her own sleep disturbances without sleeping aids. She became fascinated with chronobiology and, by extension, its practical applications to restore a state of homeostasis, not only to her sleep, but to her life as a whole. Knowing the difference between a life without sleep and with, she's now dedicated her life to sharing the forgotten skill set of sleep. So again, thank you for coming here. And what I want to do is first ask you to share a little bit about your story. And sometimes I don't ask people to do this as much, but when I listened to your story on your podcast and heard a little bit about where you're coming from, it became so critical to me, or so clear to me, why this was so important for you to really get a handle on this. And I know sometimes when people see a finished product, so to speak, of an entrepreneur or somebody say, oh, this person wouldn't have had sleep issues, or this person would have whatever it is. Would you mind share a little bit about your story and how it led you to where you are with this work today?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for kind of putting it in that way, because it is really partial to how Sleep is a Skill was created and why I feel so passionate about this topic. And it began because really solving my own personal problem with my sleep. And what it looked like was for many years living in the middle of Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends. I, was an entrepreneur and would go to bed as the sun was rising and had this narrative and identity of myself as a night owl. And I get my best work done at night. And I'm also a short sleeper. I don't necessarily need to sleep as much as everyone else. It's really a mind over matter thing. Even if you didn't sleep well, okay, you can still get your stuff done. A lot of that. So that's how it was for many years. I didn't think too much of it. As I got older, I was having more and more irregularities with my sleep, certain frustrations where I would need to be up for something the next day. It would be a real struggle to kind of try to pull myself back onto some sort of perceived workable schedule. But that's just how it was until I went through my own period of insomnia while traveling internationally. And it was a really, really scary time and a real kind of wake up call in my life. It was, and of course, like many sleep issues, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was really managing my days and my nights in a way that just was not working and wasn't prioritizing health and well-being. I was more anxious than ever. And what ended up happening was I just was so in this overdrive state and I could not sleep. And it felt so, disempowering was like the least of the words. It was frightening, scary. Is this going to always be like this? And really one of the tipping points was when I went to the doctors in Croatia and, couldn't speak the language, had to Google Translate. And the doctors were just sort of like, oh, well, I don't know what to do with you, but besides just give you some sleeping pills. So they gave me their generic version of Ambien. And that's where in that moment, it was kind of, okay, something's got to shift here. And so what ended up happening on the other side of it, I really went down the rabbit hole. And today, I get to stand as, confidently saying that during that period of my life, while it was so challenging at the time, it ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me. And I think for so many people that find themselves looking to improve their sleep, I think it can be a real, pun intended, wake up call to really take hold of our lives newly in a way that we haven't before.
Awesome. Thank you. You mentioned a couple things in there. And one of the things that comes up a lot is this whole myth, glorification of the, never sleep hustlepreneur that just can handle everything. And certainly some people need more sleep than others. But I know when I talk to people about entrepreneurial performance or any sort of performance, I like to use the analogy that I heard once before. I can't remember where, but the idea of the athlete, the physical athlete, if they have a big game coming up in a week, you would not tell them to train, extra or to get no rest. You say, get your sleep. I mean, we so know that. We're so clear that for physical performance, sleep is necessary. If you have children, you're so clear, or if you're a teacher, that sleep is necessary for kids to not be just completely off. And yet we tell ourselves this idea that intellectually, mentally, that our brain, our mind, that dimension doesn't need sleep. A 5-hour energy drink can cut it. And I know when I look back at my entrepreneurial career, of the poorest decisions I've made, they've been a combination of my biggest fears combined with a lack of sleep that would then overemphasize in my mind the likelihood of that worst case scenario happening. And so then I would take these actions that, looking back, were so clearly fear-based. And yet somewhere in there, again, I was telling myself this story. I'm the good entrepreneur. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm working hard. And so it was hard to see through that. Share a little bit, if you don't mind, with how you see that play out in other people's lives, or how it played out specifically for you, and what led you to kind of break through that myth or that idea.
Yeah, really well said. And I think so many of us can relate to, at some point in our lives, maybe my story is a bit on one side of the spectrum. Maybe you haven't had insomnia for months and months, but maybe you've had a couple nights that were bothersome and disruptive. So wherever you might be on the spectrum, I think we can all relate to that time of almost a little bit of that snowball effect that happens where we don't get that best night of sleep. And then we're a bit more anxious about whatever's on the line for us, a game, a job, a relationship, whatever. And then it begins to kind of cascade, and those catastrophic thoughts pop up way more than we might normally in our well-rested state. What's really exciting about sleep, really to kind of take it back to some of the basics, is that in recent years, it is starting to get a lot more attention as it relates to some really powerful findings about some of the effects that it has on, really insidious in all areas of our life and in our physiology, but particularly in our brain, and sort of the health of our brain, and even our cognitive effects and how we make sense of the world around us. So I think what's really important is that once we get grounded in how much even a difference, 1 or 2 nights of sleep deprivation can have on some of the results of our cognitive functions. So the way we've seen that for many people relates to, having certain studies where we'll see, just mistakes that people will make, how error prone they might be the next day. And we find that it tends to really go up when our sleep wasn't as powerful. But of course, you apply that to being on the road, you apply that to, relationships. You're not quite as fast or processing things in the same way that we might be able to. So it really becomes a high performance tool in a lot of ways, or certainly just from a perspective of having a great optimized life. And, many of us in this conversation, maybe around entrepreneurship or taking on the world around you, it becomes really, really powerful. And what I can certainly share is also with working with so many clients and seeing the before and after effect, because we do a lot with measurements and metrics. So instead of just sort of like, well, I feel like I'm sleeping more, we have them wearing a lot of sleep tech so that we can point to, okay, before when we were sleeping here, this is how life was really working for us and some of our results, versus now when we can literally see the measurable difference, how things work out for them. And it just tends to be really powerful.
That's awesome. And that's one of the tough things in any profession, is to measure change, especially when it's in tangible areas. I know sort of anecdotally that my children know, my wife certainly knows, when I'm in a busier time of my year, I have a season to my software business, that my fuse is shorter. And again, I'm not sure if I just magnify, I'm much more likely to bring up past stuff that I normally don't do, just get frustrated, like, this again. And it's this, again, sort of heightened state of either frustration. And usually for me, it is literally just less sleep, because actually during that time of year, I'm making more money. So it's not, I can say for me, it's not a money issue. I'm just physically tired. How is getting better sleep improved your work, your life, your happiness? And how does that translate, would you say, with your clients as well? What do they report?
Well, to bring it back to that, as much measurement as we can bring to your point, often intangible sort of, gray area of a part of health and wellness. One thing that we like to bring it back to are a couple biometrics when we relate to, once people begin to really restore the workability in their sleep, we kind of have this particular sleep philosophy under the framework of circadian rhythm entrainment, and we can share a bit more about what that looks like. But once they're working within there and really strengthening their circadian rhythm and their sleep results are improving, what we tend to see from a health perspective, and also just, very much how your nights are a mirror of how your days are. And they often are very reflective. So what we tend to see is heart rate going down, certainly nocturnal heart rate, and then it tends to lend itself to our daytime heart rate. But the lowering of that can help to ensure that we feel more rested by the time we wake up. Also, our HRV, which is our heart rate variability, which can be really helpful in this conversation around stress, and how much load the body can take on. It will often improve. So when we look at improve, for the most part, it's usually that the numbers are going up for HRV, heart rate variability. Then our body temperature tends to lower depending on the person or where their issues might be, or certainly stabilize. And for menstruating women, it might actually go in this nice cycle, but we can kind of count on what those cycles will look like. And then as well as respiratory rate tends to go down. And that's the amount of times we're breathing per minute while we're sleeping. And it tends to relate to a number of things, but one of them can be anxiety, and how, shallow our breath is, how, if we're over breathing and the problems that can bring about. And so those are some of the health and wellness elements. But then as we trickle it out into the ability to take on our days. Then we have some subjective scores around 17 areas of life where we're doing from 0 to 10, and often see real improvements in there, because then you're more rested to take on the day as it relates to that. But also another tangible metric that we can point to are things that people might not think about for sleep and how this would be connected, but it is interesting. Continuous glucose monitors will often have people wearing, and we'll see that their glucose can actually stabilize, because it also runs on a circadian rhythm. And we tend to see that improve in alignment with a number of other things that we're doing. But sleep deprivation can make our glucose rates go crazy, and then you're craving all the sugar and all the fun stuff. And that can also relate to how your glucose performs when you're working out. So all of these things relate to your overall picture of health.
Okay, great. So, and definitely want to get back to circadian rhythm in a minute, because I want you to be able to explain that a little bit. I'm going to go back to a simple example that I think I'm going to ask you a question, but I know how it played out in my case, or how it plays out is sometimes, for whatever reason, in my case, it was the Miami Heat being in the playoffs. I'm staying up later than normal. And, there's this good, exciting reason to be awake. And, game is done at midnight. And now I'm trying to get to sleep to be up at 6 the next morning. And it's only a couple of times, and I still work 4 days. So I've got the weekend to catch up, but it's still off. And I know there's this idea, well, I'll catch up and I'll make up for it. But I know for me, it's not easy to do that, or just say, well, if I get 56 total hours in a week, that I'm fine, no matter what sequence they come in. What would you say is, and maybe this does relate to circadian rhythm, I don't know, consistency versus total hours, how does that play out? Because again, I know when I'm off with my sleep patterns, my work does, just like you said, it reflects it. It's almost as, maybe not exactly, but it's fragmented. It's off. I get an energy burst, then I'm crashing, then I'm back up again, and then I have to eat more sugary foods. And I notice these things. How does that play out, and how does that relate to a circadian rhythm? The idea of things just being smooth and steady, as opposed to this up down and trying to catch up later.
Yeah, great question. It is important for us to remember that our circadian rhythm, when we've been speaking about that, to even kind of back up a bit, that for those that aren't as well connected, as humans, we're diurnal creatures, meaning that we're meant to be active during the day and at rest at night. And so coming from that perspective, what we've been able to ascertain so far is that we operate around on a 24-hour cycle, and that cycle becomes really, really important, and it leads to what you're speaking to, which is consistency. And it's so important to touch on for sleep, because with sleep, consistency is king. And it's so, I often say, the unsexy reality around sleep is that is so many of us, I'll get so many questions around, how about if I take 5-HTP and I layer it in with some nootropics and and all this stuff, and not to discount it, but at the same time, the one that we're often avoiding is the one that takes the daily discipline for, consistent bedtime, consistent wake time. And we also mean that 7 days a week, because many of us might think, well, I largely do that, except for, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, except for whatever, Friday, Saturday or something. And when we do that, it's wild. When one of the kind of known terms is related to social jet lag, and social jet lag meaning that we didn't travel anywhere, and yet we are experiencing almost some of the symptomology around jet lag, but it relates to our management of our calendar and our maybe social interactions, maybe just, I don't know, Netflix schedule or whatever. But either way, you're off of your regular cycle. And when we're off of that cycle, the reason why this is important, I think it's so fascinating, because if we bring it back for some of a less of like I know I should do that, but instead, if we look at it from a perspective of ancestral health, that for thousands and thousands of years as hunter-gatherers, we would have been so much more connected to the outside environment. In 2016, the World Health Organization kind of quoted that the average, American was spending over 90% of their days inside. And that was in 2016, before a virus, before anything. So we could argue that most people are probably spending that, if not more, time inside. The reason that's important for sleep is that in the past, we would have been really the opposite of that. And we'd be so entrenched in the worlds around us and the cues and the time givers, it's known as, for what informs the body of what to be doing when. So the reason that that's important is that if we were sleeping, outside, in a cave or what have you, right? We're outside in the elements and the sun rises. When the sun rises, not only is that light acting as one of the most important circadian rhythm cues, the second thing that when the sun is out is suddenly it's warming up the environment around you. So that acts as the second really important cue of this is time to awake. And that would actually release a kind of cascade of hormones around, notably being cortisol in the morning. And that would give us like that natural energy boost, get us through the day. Nice kind of bell curve effect of cortisol, but then it would slope down in the evening directly in alignment with the actually lowering of the sun, the darkening of the environment, the cooling of the environment, and that would signal all that we need to be signaled. And we were tethered to that rhythm, thousands of years. And it's only really been since Edison that we've been able to augment our days so artificially. So that's where we really get into this conversation of why I would make the argument that we often can't look to, our neighbors or friends for sleep advice, because many of us, if we're in a Western society, are kind of doing it wrong, unfortunately, right now. But that there's an exciting time right ahead of us, because now, even though so much of the tech has been part of the problem there, now we're in a conversation where there's so much tech that can help make a difference to gamify this and bring us kind of out of that as well.
Awesome. One of the best gifts we got, my wife and I, when we had our first child, was a book from a friend of ours. Thank you, Jen. Actually, thank you, Tiffany. Two of them told us about it. And it was called Healthy Sleep Habits, Happy Child.
Nice.
And it was a social killer.
Yes.
But it helped us survive. And what I mean by that is, well, first of all, it was about, certain sleep habits of when the child would go to sleep and how you recognize things. And just, we really learned the art of that. And I just think of a few things. First of all, the first month, which was still difficult no matter what. And I literally, I've in my fraternity for Hell Week, we had sleep deprivation. It's not,
yes,
it's not a coincidence that it's used as a torture for people. And so I'd done that before, but in the first month, I remember literally almost thinking like, I don't know if I'm going to make this when our child wouldn't get to sleep. It was literally that difficult, getting up at different times. But then when our child got used to, and this book was advocating simply consistent sleep times, and we would leave parties at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. 7 a.m. That'd be kind of weird. We leave parties at 7 p.m. and say, sorry, we got to go. And a lot of people, we unfortunately angered quite a few relatives, or, but we're doing this at this time and this and that. And our child would get great sleep. And I had the example of my sister who did something similar. So I got to see the results. And I remember so many times people would say, oh, your sister's so lucky. Her kids are so well, all this. And my sister is a teacher, and just everything into her kids and whatever is for the kids. So I'd kind of smile, and I'd see the other habits of these other parents, good people, but they weren't as concerned, like, the kid will adapt. And not only do you see the long-term as far as the kid being able to study in school and focus, and ADHD-like symptoms of, just constantly being wired or needing stimulation. But that was something that I think by the third month or the 2.5 month in, our child was sleeping, 6 to 8 hours during the night. And again, people are like, you're so lucky. I'm like, no, I just saw you at the party last week and your kid was tired and you gave him Coke. Or your kid, not cocaine.
Yes.
Sorry,
yes. At those 7 a.m. ragers.
That'd be really bad. Your kid was tired and they were rubbing their eyes. You're like, oh, they're hungry. I'm like, no, they're not hungry. Or they're getting, grumpy. No, they need sleep. But of course, parent doesn't want to say that. And we all know the whole thing. What's the worst thing you can tell a kid is you're overtired. That's basically telling them off, or calling their mother something. They get so ticked, but it's so true. And we can so see it. Somebody needs a nap. And yet with ourselves, we're like, I don't need a nap. And everybody else is around like, yeah, you do.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it. And it's such a thing that, kind of in that old adage around, looking to the advice of a sick society and expecting, any sort of information that's going to help us alleviate this. It's unlikely, because so many of us are living within that. And it sounds like, you guys really did your homework and were able to kind of step out of some of that insanity. Not to say it's not challenging and takes a lot, absolutely. And you're able to kind of find workability in that. And many people don't, and that becomes the new normal. And I'm not meaning to say any of this from like a high horse, because I was, again, doing for so many years all the things very much not to do to get great sleep results. So I've seen both sides of it. And I will fight for this side of it because it's just the difference that it makes in your preparation, your groundedness, kind of self-efficacy of being able to handle what comes your way. I think it's really, really powerful. So I think of it as a great foundation or starting point for not only, just the basis of health and wellness, but also for interpersonal relationships, for productivity. I mean, the list is really endless. Immune function, certainly in 2020 and beyond, very important conversation and always, but I struggle to find one area of life where it's not making a significant difference to bring that in. So I'm really gaming to help it become, how can we make sleep trendy? It's really important.
Absolutely. Well, and something you said also earlier too, when I was studying my master's in psychology, we would talk a lot about misdiagnosis of ADHD, or ADD as it used to be called, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. And very often it's, sometimes it is actually that the person meets the criteria, and that's exactly what's going on. There is something that is real called ADHD, and there are certain indicators that you can measure that'll say, yes, that's there. But a lot of the times you might have a teacher diagnosing it, or a person saying, well, this person has this style. My parents are from the islands. The island style is bipolar. My wife is Latina. The Italian cultures are notoriously bipolar-ish, the style. That doesn't mean they're bipolar.
Yes.
And so make sure if you're going to take an audio clip of this, anybody, by the way, make sure you take the whole clip. Otherwise,
yes, out of context wouldn't work. Yeah.
But in the same thing with the ADHD, is people are saying, well, if a person can't focus, they must have ADHD or ADD. And it's like, whoa, slow down. Did they get sleep? What did they drink last night? Oh, they're drinking Coca-Cola at 9:00 at night. They're up playing video games, all these different variables. And again, don't want to get on the high horse either, but it for the most part, barring an abnormal situation, seems to be there is this very clear cause and effect. And when I think of even the technology that we have of even being able to say, okay, well, I'm going to record this game and I'm going to watch it tomorrow, whatever. There's so much in our favor. Whereas before it's like, no, if you want to stay up the game, watch the game. You got to watch the game to whatever hour or deal with it. And I think this is something, to your point, of just becoming something that we just become more okay with. And especially if you're an entrepreneur and you want better results and you're in the knowledge economy, and just about all of us are, at least 50% of what we're doing. If your brain's not functioning well, and again, I can literally 3 decisions that in total have cost me well over multiples of 6 figures that were during a time when I wasn't getting the sleep that I could use. And I won't even say should, because again, that's a moral judgment. I wasn't at the top of my game. And so again, so many things when you talk about people that are paranoid or on a drug, and you say, oh, the person's paranoid, they've been smoking something, whatever. Yeah, well, when you're really tired, like my kid's like, Dad, are you drunk? I'm like, when I'm really tired, I'm like, no, I'm just really, I can't focus. I can't really make sentences well. And there's so much I know there's been studies, or maybe you probably know this more than I have. I do. Haven't there been studies about correlating lack of sleep to certain either drug use or alcohol, or like what it affects? Yes. Are you familiar with anything on that?
Yeah. So our ability to kind of response or kind of responsibility, so when we speak about that, often many of the studies have been related to safety. So whether it's for, pilots, or if it's looking for driving, our response time tends to be one of the things that we look at the equivalent of how much does sleep deprivation kind of is akin to things like 1 or 2 drinks or more. And so that has been really popularized from a safety perspective, but I think also to your point around just general interpersonal connectivity and our ability to really kind of fire it on cylinders for whatever's listed on our calendar for today, that we can actually show up powerfully. That is very much influenced by that sleep. And so one of the things that we speak to, one of the things that I was alluding to earlier around sleep getting a bit more press recently has been related to this finding a few years back around lymphatic drainage. And what that is, if people aren't familiar, is they might be familiar around lymphatic drainage, but lymphatic drainage is really the cleaning or cleansing out of the brain while we're sleeping in the first stage of our sleep, in deep sleep primarily. So with that, if there's a missing of that cleaning process, that's kind of the toxic buildup or cellular waste created from the brain throughout the day. And if we're not able to go through that process, it's the primary time when that cleansing, and kind of, you think of it as kind of a janitorial process, when you leave the, office building at night and you come back and everything's sparkling again, you're like, what happened? Well, that part was really crucial, because if you go a bunch of weeks without that process happening, it's going to smell, it's going to be really funky. So we want to ensure that each day we're allowing the brain to do that. And if we're not, the concern is that it looks really correlative to the buildup of amyloid beta plaques that then can be linked to things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and some real kind of neurological and cognitive abilities. And the exciting thing around that is now we're starting to lend itself to more and more energy and attention around sleep and its importance to prevent that. I think the only challenge there is, for so many of us, we think of that as so long-term, or, okay, that's many, many years down the road. But when we do find that if we're not able to kind of go through that process, if we can think of the short-term effects as kind of being some of that baseline brain fog, slower response time, and then even some more edginess. One of the measurements that we'll use at Sleep is a Skill to kind of bring this into a daily perspective a bit more versus being so far off is that HRV metric we spoke of, and which tends to be a readout of, are you in a sympathetic state or a parasympathetic state? So when we have that kind of baseline for what we tend to operate on, and then we see that after a bunch of days without the right amount of sleep, then we start to see we're actually getting into more of a stressed out state measurably. That can kind of help make it real for people to, all right, okay, I got to take some R&R time, maybe a nice Epsom salt bath or whatever it looks like for you, but really can make it more like a game, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Absolutely. So one of the things I think of is a lot of people take a lot of pride, and I know this is certainly a male affliction. It's an entrepreneurial thing that as we talked about earlier, of, I can handle it. I'm tough. I'm tough enough. How does a person know, or what signs would you say that a person's going to see that let them know that it's not just, well, I'm getting older? So for example, I'm 49 now. I know there's certain things I can't do as well as I used to. I know I don't remember quite as much as I used to. And I've even asked doctors stuff. Am I losing my mind? Like, no, you're just getting a little older. It's okay.
Yes.
How does a person know from a self-diagnosis, okay, maybe I'm off, or maybe I've been off? Because it's not even so much. Sometimes I think we can see the acute events. Oh, well, this just happened. And so I think we can logically say, okay, this happened, that happened, that happened. Okay, now, and then I blew up at, my spouse or whatever it is when I normally don't. Versus, how could somebody tell, what would be the signs that maybe they're simply, not that it's horrendous, but that they're just missing out, that it could be a lot better?
Yeah, great questions. Because one, it's almost like the analogy around the fish in the fish tank. They don't know they're in water. It's just they're always swimming in it. So for many of us, and certainly that was my case for so long, I was just swimming in an environment of kind of ill health, poor management of my days and my nights. And that was how I was used to it. So I didn't think much of it. So really good point there. One, well, we can bring it out on the perspective of sleep, just some of the tangibles. So one being that for the average healthy adult, we're looking for hitting the mark around between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Granted, I know that it has a lot of asterisks to it, and depending on different parts of your life and the quality of that sleep. But ballpark around that is that consistent bedtime, wake time. And then as a result, some of the things that we've been speaking to too are energy sustainability throughout the day. Are we finding ourselves going to a lot of caffeine to make it through the day, multiple naps? Are we looking for kind of nootropics, energy supplements, all of those sort of things, external things to get us through what we perceive to be a challenging thing to to manage those 16 hours when we're awake versus the maybe 8 or more or less hours that we're asleep. So we're starting to take note of all those things, but then one of the things that I really suggest in the 21st century is beginning with a sleep tracker. The reason I say that is just because I've spoken to so many people that are very adamant that they sleep great, no problem, and then they get some sort of sleep tracker, and it can actually become, a new challenge for them to take on, because then they start to see, oh wow, wait, what? My heart rate is high throughout the entire night, and maybe it's just finding its lowest point right before I'm waking up, which tends to relate to being just really dragging and tired. Or my body temperature is high throughout the whole night. Oh my goodness, is that relating to the, nightly cocktail that I'll have or what have you? Starting to get connected to all of those things that we're doing and the results that we're having. So I think that can be a great place to begin, because then that can start to show you in black and white the reality of those things. Because there are a number of things around sleep that are gray areas. We might not actually remember the many wake-ups we might have had. And once you start seeing that in black and white again and again, then it can motivate us to make the difference.
Awesome. Thank you. When you work with people, whether they're entrepreneurs, well, actually, let's focus on entrepreneurs a second. What are the unseen costs, not only as far as their health and their frustration or low energy? What do you find are some of the financial costs that maybe people aren't aware of? And maybe you can't typify it or speak to it, but in general, as far as fatigue, lower performance, because I think a lot of people, until they think that's at stake, they might say, okay, well, that now you've got my attention. If that's their primary focus, their business or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because there certainly are different camps for people around sleep. Usually when people are coming to me, something has happened. They've they've gotten a divorce and now their sleep is really abysmal, or they lost their job, or it's just become so chronic, and they just hit their 60th birthday and realize, oh my God, I have not been able to sleep this has been decades and decades of this problem, and really looking to take that on. So I'm usually getting most people when they're, it's kind of this enough is enough point. But there's also many other camps for people that might be listening that maybe they're not there, but they either are kind of in that biohackers, group where they're already sleeping pretty well, but they want to be elite athletes. They want to, or just really, really take their health really seriously, and they want that added edge. Or, there's also the group kind of that you might be pointing to too, that they're not, nothing's kind of hitting them over the head with that difficulty around their sleep, but maybe things are not working as well as they might like it to. What I would say for most people is, I really believe that if you're in the conversation of health and wellness, productivity, entrepreneurship, all of this, that if we're looking at this conversation in a pyramid structure, that sleep should really be the foundational largest bottom part. So if that is the case, I think it could behoove us all to take another look at the thing that we do every single day without fail, for the most part. So from that place, really re-examine. And that's the reason why I really urge people to take on the title of this company from a place of a new context to stand in, of sleep being a skill. Because if it is a skill, then what level are you at right now? Because I think many of us certainly I didn't know that the timing of my food would impact the quality of my sleep. The type of that food, the timing of my exercise could impact the quality of my sleep. The timing of my thoughts and the type of thoughts could impact even my body temperature. Just so many things that then would impact my results when I would wake up the next day. So taking another look, kind of under the hood at our results in sleep can really make a difference in this goal to improve our overall life.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I tell people as an entrepreneur, I hate being told what to do.
Yes.
But if I find something that'll work, I'm open.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older, my reasons for eating better, my reasons for going vegetarian and now pretty much almost vegan and different things, whether I'm right or wrong, I might not even have it all right or wrong, but my reasons have been, oh, I want more energy to be around my kids. I want more energy to be more present with my wife. So that's become more of a driving factor than, okay, I want to look a certain way or whatnot. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But for me, I was like, okay, I've got a decent metabolism. I look good enough, great, or healthy enough, or skinny enough, or whatever the words that the magazines or whoever says. But for me, when I look at it as what I've seen a big difference it makes, and even something as simple as when I get in a really good day of volleyball on Fridays at the beach and I come home borderline comatose and I'm like slap happy, almost drunk. My kid's like, okay, what are we doing tonight? Okay, we're watching a movie on Netflix tonight and dad might pass out halfway through or not. And I would realize that, and again, all positive stuff. I got to play volleyball at the beach, good exercise, so many positive things, and yet would still realize that the next day, I was still a little grumpy the next day if I didn't get the sleep I needed. So it wasn't even, oh, I got to do what I wanted. So I hear people say, well, I like my work. And so if I work extra, say, well, I'm not sure that's the variable. And I also throw in the idea, and this is more of an opinion, I believe there's so much going on in the world to only do work for 6 days a week or 7 days a week. I just think, again, it's not a moral judgment. I think we're missing out the same way. If you're missing out on sleep, you're just missing out on things. And I know for me, there's a certain pace that I'm operate at, that when I'm at my pace, I'm happy. And when I'm not at my pace, whatever, and there's, everybody's got their pace. I'm not advocating a particular pace, but I know what my pace feels like when I'm not feeling rushed. And part of it does have to do with cash flow and if I have money in the bank and if sales are going well.
Yep.
But also part of it is because of I'm, observing a certain thing. How have you found that's worked for you? Because one of the things maybe, and share a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you've done a lot of world travel and that's a lot of adjusting the sleep and doing the digital nomad thing. Because I know for a lot of our audience, that's a big tool or a big idea too. How has being able to sleep well helped you? And maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about traveling and crossing time zones and how you even try to manage that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So much gold there. Well, I think one of the fantastic things that I got out of seeing both sides of what life is kind of like without sleep and with sleep was that now I've become so committed, and I often say, like a joke, addicted to feeling good, because I'll be willing to make some of the changes that I think without that I wouldn't have done. So for instance, I would have, meeting up with friends, have a drink. And yet now I know so much of how much that will impact my sleep and how I feel the next day. It's no longer worth it to be in the same way that it might have been. I'm not, saying that you have to not ever drink to get great sleep, but I am saying it definitely does tend to make a difference, if done regularly. So things that might be hard behavioral shifts, things like, there's a lot, and this could take an entirely separate podcast, but even the timing of your meals and how that will trigger, our basically the strength of our circadian rhythm. So moving, I used to love to, sit at the end of the day, have my popcorn, some wine or whatever. So shifting so many of those behaviors then became so paramount to getting the sleep results that now I've become really accustomed to and committed that it continues in my life and then for other clients as well. So it's, once you get that groundedness, I think it becomes really a no-brainer. But as it relates to then managing that, and when you now expect a certain readiness for your day, and then you start traveling internationally and you skip time zones, how do you manage all that? And so one, I would say, even just from a practical takeaway, I really love this app called Time Shifter, which I think is really helpful for anyone traveling internationally. I know it's a tricky time for international travel, even maybe domestic travel, but if you do find yourself going to be hopping time zones, and that app is really helpful for kind of creating an itinerary around light timing, as well as, if you use melatonin or caffeine or what have you. So taking a look at that is really helpful. But as far as going into different time zones and then different sleep environments, the measurement system is really eye-opening, because you get to see how much different environments can impact the quality of your sleep and your health. And it might be as kind of basic as even some basic air quality, and how that will impact our respiratory breathing, our respiratory rate, and, body temperature, and the ambient temperature in your space, and the lighting in the space, and all of that sort of stuff. So it does have us get more kind of responsible for that. And so I began to have a bit more of a system with each place I would go to, kind of like the must-haves to kind of transform my space, but also then at the same time, how to have that balance of not getting too fragile, or if you will, around what we're expecting for our environment. So making ourselves be resilient in the face of that too. So striking that happy kind of medium. But it became really, really important for me to have those structures and consistency. So even if I'm hopping from whatever, New York to Bali or wherever, that I get myself quickly kind of back onto that primary consistent schedule, and the body really, really appreciates that and returns in kind with your hormonal functioning, your kind of mental stability, your, the measurement system that we get to see. And then if something's really out of whack, then it can be a sign for me to really take time to recover.
Awesome. Thank you. So I got a chance to take a look at one of the tools you share on your website, the Optimized Bedroom, and you have some strategies for people just very clearly laid out, things of here's exactly what you can do to improve your sleep environment. If somebody's just listening to this, and even if, by the way, I do recommend they go to your website and get that, but if they didn't, what would you say for most people are the top 2 or 3 things that people are either doing wrong or at least not effectively, if that makes sense, that they could make that are pretty easy changes, as opposed to, I know for some people, lifestyle changes such as when I drink or eating popcorn late at night are tougher
Yes.
things. What are some of the easier things you say, gosh, here's these 2 or 3 things, if you just observe these, that they would make a big difference for you?
Yeah, great question. So if you get nothing out of what I'm saying, I hope that you're left with a couple of these main takeaways. One being that we want to create a real 2-part system to our days, so that during the days they're as bright, and literally bright, like tangible lumens or lux output, literally bright as humanly possible, where we're getting outside, getting full spectrum sunlight. That you're having plenty of light in your environment during the day, you're moving during the day, you're getting your body temperature up, all of that activity. Also the perceived stressful activities, maybe those hard conversations or the things that might be kind of keeping you up at night, that you're handling those during the day. But then on that 2-part element of things, once the night hits, once the sun sets, that we're really transitioning and managing our stress levels and our environment in alignment with that darkness. So we want to actually cultivate that darkness. So ideal end of the spectrum would be kind of utilizing a digital sunset, where once the sun is setting, you also kind of putting away your tech around that same time. However, I do know that many of us are not going to do that. So if that's the case, then managing the light in that environment. So then that's when you can put on blue blockers, but make sure they're not clear ones. So they need to be really amber or red, to cut the blue and green light that can suppress melatonin. So we're trying to cultivate a very unequivocal, clear ratio for the brain to know, okay, I did that, that big day of beach volleyball, like you were speaking to, and it was so clear that I just got so much sun, and that was very obvious to the brain. And now here I am in very dim lighting, and it's time to then eventually go to total blackout lighting for sleep. And you might think that I'm like belaboring this light element, but it's really a big, big, big deal. And it really relates to the tangible results of our melatonin production. So just remember that melatonin is known as the hormone of darkness. So, and the reason for that is that when darkness is present, melatonin can really be secreted in the same level to the amount that we want to achieve, so that we can have that rich and uninterrupted, largely sleep. So those are a couple other things. And the big thing I would like to also put in for those of us that are kind of get stressed or anxious around our sleep is moving a bit of the focus of the sleep kind of awareness from the nights to the days. So beginning when you first wake up, the big element is that we're getting outside, getting that full spectrum of sun first, because once it hits the eyes, that communicates, that's connected to our suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that basically sets our time clock, our internal time system, a timekeeper, to then create all that cortisol that we want to have to get at its peak, and then be replaced with melatonin later on in the night. But it really does work on that system. So start shifting to really bright days and very dim nights.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, that's one of the things I'm so always try to look for what's a natural way. And I believe so much that what we have, the way our body works, if we can just align with it and tune into it, that so much of what we need is there. And even if you have to buy sleep pills or this or that, again, these are things that hopefully can help you not need that if you get in tune with what's the body's already set up to do most of these things. So awesome. Thank you so much. Where can people find out more about your work if they want to learn more about this or your consultations, the tool I mentioned about helping people create the optimized bedroom? How can they get in touch with you?
Yes. So sleepisaskill.com really acts as a great bucket for all the things. So once you get there, there's a bunch of different steps you could take no matter where you're at with your sleep. So one, you can, like you said, download that PDF. And along with that PDF, then you will be signed up for our weekly newsletter. So every Monday, we send out a newsletter. In case you haven't noticed in this conversation, I'm pretty obsessive personality. So I call it Molly's Monday Obsessions. And so it's all these things that I'm obsessing about around sleep. So really we can go to town with that. And I try to make sure that there's just so many, it's very resource rich so that you can get lots of articles and videos and what have you each week. In alignment with that, we also have a sleep assessment on there if you want to go deeper, have some more insight, or connection or accountability or coaching around your sleep. We are launching later on this year. We've been running cohorts for this, but now we're going to be doing a more DIY version with accountability structures of an online sleep training course, which is exciting. We also have the Sleep is a Skill podcast on there. And then, so once you get onto that platform, there's lots of different ways that you can engage, whether it's social media or what have you. So I do encourage people to at least begin this road of improving their sleep from just being in the conversation immersion around that.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing what you know. And there was a thing, thermonuclear something used in a sentence. So I'm gonna have a fun time with the transcribers on that, see if they got that right. Thank you so much. And hopefully those of y'all listening or watching understand why. Like I said, I just feel there's so much you have, and definitely check out her podcast. I've listened to it. The first 2 episodes were awesome. And thank you again for coming out. To everybody, I hope this encourages you to get a sense. It's not a value judgment thing. It's not a moral thing. But if you're looking to have better performance, the same way we talk about in general, 4 days, or not specifically 4 days, but just more time to enjoy life, to find your pace. Hopefully this will help you do that. And as always, look forward to helping you help more people and make more money in less time, doing what you do best so you can better enjoy your family, your friends, and your life. Thanks for listening.